What's up guys, Asian here again, and today we're going to be going over the class rep meeting notes that was published I believe late last night. So this are the notes from their January 30th meeting, so that was, as of recording of this video, that was about 4 days ago. So with these kind of notes, we kind of have an idea of what tomorrow's sort of PTS patch notes might look like, and I'm already thinking of several ideas to kind of what the next sort of comparisons are going to be. Obviously, we're going to be taking a look at the racial changes and things like that, but also what sort of tests that we might do and the implications of the changes that they have planned out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with this. Just a disclaimer here, for those of you guys who are new to the channel, I pretty much only really cover PvE material. If you guys have watched all my videos, you'll see that there's not a lot of PvP stuff in there, and that's just because I don't really PvP enough, and I'm not really confident in a lot of aspects of PvP. I do know a little bit, so the parts where I feel comfortable enough to kind of comment on it, I will. But generally speaking, any sort of PvP implications that might result from these changes, I am not really going to touch upon. If you are interested in PvP stuff, I recommend checking out a different content creator instead. That is a little bit more experienced in PvP. So I pretty much only kind of will be talking about PvE stuff in this channel and on this video and these changes as a whole. So let's just gonna go ahead and go through all of these, skip all this introduction here. So one thing if you guys are not aware of this, the class reps are under NDA, and these notes were written by Joy Division, one of the class reps. So there's a lot of stuff that they probably talked about in the meeting that they're not able to discuss here. So a lot of the things that they discuss, again, because it's covered by NDA, we won't be able to know anything about it until the PTS actually releases, and that is true for both the Wrathstone PTS DLC as well as anything that they might have planned for Elsweyr in Update 22. The first, talking about the racials. So they just kind of went into kind of generic what they want to see change with the racial passes for each of the different races. So obviously he can't go into specifics just because of the whole NDA things, but one of the things that they did mention is that Zos is looking to make flat bonuses interact consistently with DP. So if you guys are not aware right now, the way that stats are currently kind of measured out and determined on live server right now is you have your base value, and that is taking into consideration your attributes, your item sets, things like that, but it is not including certain other benefits. So the Mage Mundus, for example, and sets like Necropotence and Bright Throats, those are actually not affected by CP. So your base magicka or stamina is really just your attributes and any sort of item bonuses that you might have, as well as a few other things here and there. That base value is then multiplied by your 20% increase by CP. From there, after you have that CP modifier, that's when you add in the things like the Mage Stone, you add in things like Bright Throats or Necropotence, and then that total value is then affected by all other resulting modifiers. So things like Warhorn, Daunted passive, racial passives on live server right now. So basically what this line is saying is they're trying to make flat bonuses basically all react with CP. So things like Necropotence, Bright Throats, the Mage Mundus, currently because they are not affected by CP, they are actually fairly, they're a little bit weaker than some other sets out there, but with this particular change, now everything is going to be affected by CP. At least that's the way that I'm reading it. So I'm imagining that basically the change to resource calculation is just going to be they include the CP value in the other modifiers instead. So instead of having something like base times CP plus your extra flat bonuses times modifier, it's just going to be base plus flat modifiers times all modifiers combined. So just kind of simplifying that calculation a little bit, and that should at the very least increase your stat values a little bit, but it's a little bit tricky because again of those flat bonuses like Necropotence and things like that. Anyways, here are a couple of the bonuses that they're going to be looking at for each of the different races. So Argonians, they're taking a look at trying to increase the healing done and higher resource return on potions. So they are basically going to under-nerf Argonians, although by how much we're not 100% certain. They're also going to look like increase the healing done, probably maybe up 1 or maybe 2%. Again, specifics are under NDA. Bretons, The ZOS does like where they are. They're looking to make some adjustments and conditionals to that resistance passive. So Bretons do have that additional spell resistance passive, so it does look like they want to make a few changes to that. But it seems like they're not really going to be touching that sustain, that 7% reduction in sustain. Again, we'll have to wait until Monday to see the specifics. With the Dark Elves, more damage is the goal, so they are going to gain more stamina and magicka stats, and then they will have that their bonus to health reduced. So that should bring them a little bit closer in line with Elsweyr. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. So for the Elsweyr, the High Elves, the goal was for Bretons to be sustain oriented, and Spell Recharge was making High Elf both damage and sustain. So ZOS seems to want this to be a damage race, and they'll look at reforming Spell Charge to provide something other than main stat return. So right now, on the PTS, Spell Recharge basically restores magic or stamina, whichever is your highest pool, whenever you use a class ability. I believe it's every 6 seconds. So it does seem like they're going to basically redo that passive. What they're going to be doing instead of main stat return, and that's kind of up in the air. Main stat in this instance refers to magicka, stamina, and health. So might be ulti gain, might be I don't know what they could potentially have for main stat return. Maybe crit boost. I'm not sure, crit damage boost. Except anything that related to crit is kind of an overpowered racial passive. So it'll be interesting to see what they do for Elsweyr tomorrow. For the Imperials, they're looking to make Red Diamond do more than just a % proc for health. They do know that the race does need a boost. Imperials on PTS were a little bit too restricted for tanking builds, and so they are a new race, and they are going to have basically redo the Red Mountain passive to kind of reflect that. Again, specifics are under NDA. We have no idea what this really means. This is just kind of saying we're going to be redoing the Red Diamond passive. For the Khajiit, they generally liked what was happening here. They are going to give some small boosts to stats, and then the stealth passive is going to be adjusted just so they're not super ultimate stealth cats. So looks like Khajiits, you are going to be keeping that crit boost just from the sounds of this. Again, we'll have to wait for Monday to kind of see what they're actually going to end up doing. So for the Orcs, the ZOS wants it to be more damage oriented, quote, a brawler race rather than a sustain option. So they'll see a boost in stamina with less overall health, and the Unflinching Rage passive will restore health rather than stamina on doing damage with that cooldown. So it does seem like they are taking away that small sustain boost with Orcs, giving them a little bit more stamina. So they're pretty much going to be kind of the damage oriented race, it seems like, but you will need, if that loss of that sustain passive, you are going to need some additional help with things like cursings and orbs in order to fully sustain a stamina rotation. So it will be interesting to see where Orcs stack up now that they have lost their sustain passive there. Red Guards, generally satisfied with how the race functions. They will be getting a utility boost. Again, this kind of very blanket statement because the NDA thing. We'll have to see what happens on Monday. For Bosmer, the stackable movement speed. So this is definitely more for PvP stuff. So they have, I believe it's a 20% additional movement speed after roll dodging with a bow or something like that. It might just be after a roll dodge, and that obviously stacks with Major Expedition and other sources of movement speed. So PvPers are a little bit concerned that Bosmer do get that kind of speed boost. They are still going to maintain it, it just won't be as high. It's probably going to get nerfed down to maybe like 5 or 10%, I'd imagine. And they're going to get a short damage bonus to kind of compensate for that reduction in the speed boost. So that is pretty much it for Bosmer. There is something about trading stealth for different buffs, so this is more stealth gameplay. It doesn't really affect PvE, more for PvP stuff. And finally for the Nords, this is kind of a bit of a contentious race right now, especially for tanks, just because of that ultimate generation. So ZOS does understand that there is that concern that Nords are going to be the default tank race to go to because of that ulti gen. So that's, they did say that before they're going to make any changes, they do want to see some actual gameplay in order to see whether the additional ulti gen does come about. So the current ulti gen situation is 5 ultimate every 10 seconds. I think it's whenever you take damage. So that ultimately ends up being an additional half ultimate generation per second, which does increase the Warhorn uptime, but there are some instances where you're going to want to save Warhorn for those critical moments where you want to basically maximize your damage. So for example, in Rakad, just thinking like VMAW hard mode, you're probably not going to want to use Warhorn on pads 2, 4, 6. Just because those are short pads, you're going to want to save them for pads 3, 5, and 7. So in those instances, you might be holding on to Warhorn for a little bit, just so you have, can maximize that time that major force is active so you can really hit that boss. Another instance would be the third boss in Vhoff. Obviously you don't want to use Warhorn when the boss is invulnerable, just a waste of your major force proc. So it's not like you're using Warhorn on cooldown necessarily in all situations. So yeah, Zos does want to see a little bit of kind of actual gameplay to kind of see where that all plays out here. In terms of item sets, they did talk about 3 specific sets here. They did talk about sets in general. Generally speaking, they said that proc sets that players have to work for are good additions to the game, and I agree, having to work to get that proc is generally going to be good rather than having something free like loads, for instance, or even Calurians. So Zos did indicate that they appreciate the difference, and from what they said, Elsweyr does seem like it's going to offer players some options without really resorting to overperforming sets. So it does seem like they have that balance kind of in mind when they're going to create new Elsweyr sets. So there should be at the very least 7 new sets coming in Elsweyr. So you have the 3 overland sets, and you have 3 overland sets, 3 crafted sets, and then you have probably 3 or 4 drop set from the new trials. You're looking at 10 new sets that they have to rebalance, so hopefully they won't necessarily make them too overpowered. Now for some of the sets that they were talking about, so Icy Conqueror, which I believe is a dungeon set, it is a dungeon set, so that deals like frost damage, I think, or something like that. So I did say it was too high, so this is basically something very similar to Calurians, I think, so they're probably going to drop that tooltip down. Warbands, this is Sogvin's Warband. So right now it procs on, I believe, light and heavy attack crits. So now it'll proc on direct damage, so that way they can get the procs faster. They say more specific performance, but I'm not sure what that really talks about there. They do understand that min-max groups won't be needing this set, and that's kind of what I found in my tests too, that obviously it does decently, but it is worse than Advanced Yokeda. But these bonuses are available for bow builds and people not in organized gameplay, which is true. Sogvin's does actually end up being pretty decent for bow builds or even werewolf builds where you don't necessarily have minor force up. So it is a fair trade-off, I think, with Sogvin's. If you're a very, very min-max group, you don't need it, but if you kind of want to have some fun, do a bow build, maybe do a werewolf build, Sogvin's is a pretty good set to wear there. Curse Eater, there's been a lot of feedback on Curse Eater with it being super overpowered, so they are going to be changing that set. They still want it to provide the same basic function, so they do want it to have that cleanse, but they are going to make it so the set will only proc on direct heals. So that probably basically says all heal over times will not proc Curse Eater, so things like Mutagen probably won't proc it, and it also has a longer cooldown. They did talk about some other sets, but they want to see more gameplay before discussing any changes that might be happening here. Some other stuff that they talked about in terms of gears, so they do know that Fury and 7th Legion are overshadowing every stamina PvP option. Again, I don't PvP that much, but I do know, just from word of mouth, that Fury and 7th Legion are pretty much the go-to for stamina DPS options for PvP. As well as Earthgore, they are taking a look at Earthgore here. So it's not going to be for this update, so it's not going to be on next week's PTS, but they are going to be taking a look at these couple of points here. Now the Earthcore thing is probably more for a PvP thing, less of a PvE stuff, just because for PvE, Earthcore seems pretty balanced. I mean, there's not much you can really balance in PvE in terms of Earthcore, I think, but it's probably more for the PvP side, where you have that Earthcore proccing in a big ball group, and it's just burst healing everybody, and you have multiple people wearing Earthcore, so you have multiple Earthcore procs going on, so I can see Earthcore being an issue for PvP that way. Now for classes, class balance is not a focus for this update, so there's a lot of NDA stuff going on here and a lot of update 22, so Elsweyr stuff, so class does seem like class balance is not going to be on the table for update 21, but for Elsweyr, the next PTS cycle, it does seem like class rebalance is going to be on the table there for the Elsweyr PTS here. So one thing that they kind of came up is that Zos has indicated that it would be helpful to describe why something is a problem rather than just saying buff this, nerf this, which is something that a lot of people should be doing. Like if you are saying that a skill or a set is overperforming, you need to give a specific reason why it's overperforming. You can't just say this set is underperforming, please buff it to this. You have to be like, this set is underperforming because you have other sets X, Y, and Z that are providing the same bonuses, that are easier to obtain, that pull higher DPS or provide more utility for the group. That's kind of what you want to do when you're giving feedback, and this is true not just obviously in the game, but also in real life. You can't just say, hey, this is a problem, fix it. You kind of have to say, this is a problem because this, that, and this. I tried this, you know, I took a look at that, so on and so forth. So whenever, if you guys are on the forums and you guys are giving feedback, you are submitting bug reports or whatever, make sure to include specifics, make sure to include why something is an issue or why you think it is an issue. Just don't go blanket saying, please buff this because it feels weak. That's not really a good reason to buff anything. Let's see here. They did identify a couple of pain points, but again, a lot of NDA stuff. Again, a lot of it's going for Elsweyr, so not something that they can discuss in this particular document. So for PvP stuff, again, I'm just going to lightly touch upon this, mainly because this isn't really something that I'm very comfortable speaking about necessarily. So apparently there's a stuck in combat bug. I have actually experienced this a few times in Cyrodiil, the few times I am in Cyrodiil, where you're basically stuck in combat and you can't like use the Transitus Way Shrines, and you can't like swap skills, you can't swap gear, things like that, and it's a very long time. So it does seem to be like a bug, and they do know that it is there, but they don't want to implement any sort of fixes right now because apparently this kind of combat status thing it's actually a core feature of the game. They don't necessarily want to change it because that might end up breaking a lot more things than they fix, but they do see that it is a bug, and they are going to try to figure some ways, workarounds around the kind of main pain points, particularly the teleportation as well as quick slots. So they did mention that they do want to change it so that being in combat does not prevent the use of Transitus Way Shrines, and they might also allow you to change quick slots while you are in combat there. But this is a fairly major bug, and they are working on it, but again, they did say it's a core feature necessary for combat systems, so they don't want to necessarily put something in that might end up breaking 10 other things in the game. Then for rapids here, they did kind of mention rapids, so skill centered around movement, speed snares, things like that. So they did say this is another one of the future update things, so NDA once again. So they did, let's see. They did say that what's on the PTS right now, the change to rapid maneuvers, is impractical. Healing and buffs will cause the skill to fall off and thus waste somebody's stamina. So they did say that they are going to be taking a look at this. So for PvP stuff, they did say they're going to look at time stop, earth core for the next update, snipe, scattershot, stunned. The bug is fixed in the PTS. Apparently there's a bug with scattershot stunning people. And oblivion damage, that's going to be next update. So earth core and oblivion damage are going to be in Elsweyr, but it seems like time stop and snipe and scattershot, those bugs are going to be addressed in this update. So time stop, the original cost of 8100 magicka. They are going to be making further adjustments if necessary. So in terms of PvP, again, I know time stop is a pretty strong CC in PvP, particularly the one that kind of negates, I think it's 5,000 healing or something like that. So I can see why they would want to increase the cost of that, because I have seen it be used very well, especially in choke points, so kind of basically in denial of access ability there. But for PvE, this is kind of really bad news for particularly Nightblade tanks and Templar tanks, because those two classes do not have a hard CC. So time stop is already their hard CC, and increasing the cost of this ability basically makes it very difficult for Nightblade or a Templar tank to really be casting this more than maybe twice. So if you think about how much magic you have as a tank, typically you're trying to get around maybe 20k or so, so you're only able to cast this twice before you basically can't cast it again. So that's 2 hard CC casts, and that's pretty much it. So for Nightblade and Templar tanks, this change is probably not going to be really good for you guys. So hopefully they will make it so that it is only the negated healing morph that gets the increased cost, and maybe the other morph gets a reduced cost on top of their like additional effects maybe. But for PvE, this increase in cost is not a good thing for the non-DK, non-ward, and non-sword tanks. For snipe, they are looking at the desyncs and the bugs with the snipe skill. The arena weapons, so this is like the master weapons, the maelstrom weapons, they are reevaluating these. It's on the radar, it's just not, I don't think it is a priority target right now. They do know that it do need to be adjusted, but it doesn't seem like it's on the radar it doesn't seem like it's an immediate thing that they're going to be working on here. Shade, let's see, they're still trying to figure out what the bug is. I'm assuming that there's a bug with Shade. Again, I don't know PvP enough to really know all these PvP bugs. One-handed enchants, so they did talk about how it's basically impacting tanking and dual DPS. The changes, I think, for dual DPS is fine. Like, it's a slight nerf, but like I think it was kind of needed to kind of bring stam DPS down a little bit, and it's not that big of a nerf ultimately. But for tanking, it was actually a pretty big deal for tanking. It pretty much completely upends how we're going to approach tanking in terms of like weapons and enchants, things like that. So they have communicated those changes. I didn't have enough time to talk about this, we'll have to wait and see on Monday and potentially next week to see what sort of one-handed enchant changes they do have in store for us, particularly on the tanking side of things here. Then they have Wrathstone dungeon feedback. So what is this one here? This is just kind of talking about pain points and things like that, and how most of it's being brought to the dev points attention. Nothing really interesting there. Wrathstone dungeon feedback. There's a lot of talk about normal stuff, and then like it's fine for normal, but veteran is going to be tougher, which I think is fine. The DLC dungeons have traditionally been the harder dungeons, so I really don't see a reason to really change the difficulty of these dungeons. Like I recently tried out the Frostvault DLC dungeon. We didn't have that much time to kind of slam our heads against hard mode, but I did think that hard mode was a nice challenge. So like when we're an organizer group, we were doing it with Mayflower, so very good players there. So I do think that this is, I mean, I feel like the Wrathstone dungeons are in a pretty good spot in terms of difficulty. I don't necessarily disagree with giving skins out for completing it on vet. Like I think that's nice because it'll get more people playing the dungeons, but at the same time, you kind of want to reward the people who are doing the speedrun no death hard modes, even if they are super difficult, whether that's a title or like a pet or something. I'm not sure. I have to double check the achievements, but like a title is nice for those who can get the speedrun no death hard mode achievements. Like a lot like what they have right now with the Wolf Hunter dungeons. Personally, I would prefer the skin to be connected to speedrun no death hard mode, but again, I do understand them giving it out with just clearing it on vet as a way to kind of get people to play these dungeons more often. And that's pretty much it for the class rep notes. So again, a lot of this stuff is covered under the NDA, so they can't talk about this publicly at all. There's a lot of things that they talked about that are going to be focusing in on Elsweyr, that PTS patch, so that'll be coming in like 2 or 3 months. You give time for ZOS to kind of work things out, things like that. There have been some bugs that have been communicated, and they are working on kind of solutions there, and there are going to be rebounds to the racial passives as anticipated starting tomorrow. So I have a link down in the description below to this particular forum thread, so you guys can read this in its entirety and kind of give feedback on the forums if you have a forum account there. But we'll have to wait and see on Monday what kind of changes they have in store for us and how that's going to kind of impact at the very least, the PvE meta from my side of things. Again, for the PvP stuff, check out another content creator to kind of explore how these changes might affect PvP. That's it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.